The 2022 NFL Draft is over, so how did your team do? It's time to find out right now as we hand out grades for all 32. So let's start at the top with the teams that did the best and got the best grades here, starting with the Baltimore Ravens. And what a draft the Ravens had here. Looking at their picks, just impressed at the volume, the quality, the quantity. They also moved Marquise Brown to get some extra draft capital there, so gotta love the picks early. Kyle Hamilton, the safety, they can plug and play him next to Marcus Williams. Big upgrade at that position. Tyler Linderbaum, a center that they've been looking for. Upgrade that interior offensive line. Bring a little bit of Marshall Yanda back to that front. And then they get back in there and get David Ojabo. And Ojabo's a guy that they like, Odafe Oweh. He was a good mentor and friend to him. So they're comfortable with these two guys leading their edge pass rush for a while. So just in those three picks, the Ravens did outstanding work. Then they had a bunch of picks we know on day 3 and just went nuts with depth. And I really like Travis Jones, the defensive tackle they got from UConn. I think he can play a variety of positions in their front. And I think he can replace Calais Campbell in time to be that disruptive presence. And the big guy, literally the biggest guy they got of anybody in the draft, Daniel Falele, the offensive tackle. I think he could start at some point soon at right tackle. Just a behemoth, big player, the biggest we've ever seen come through the NFL. So I'm excited to see how the Ravens work him into their run blocking. The next team that also gets an A+ for the draft, the New York Jets. And right from the top, Sauce Gardner, love him as the top cornerback there for Robert Saleh's defense. They come back with Garrett Wilson, who'll be a top target for last year's number 2 overall pick, Zach Wilson. Then this was the real coup in the first round. Coming back to get Jermaine Johnson. I thought he was a top 10 player, one of the best pass rushers in this draft. Saleh gets him as well. So back end of that pass defense, front end, taken care of with 2 big impact players. You come back then with Breece Hall, the running back out of Iowa State, gives them a feature guy as well. So a lot of help for Zach Wilson this offseason. Their offensive line a little bit better. They should be better at tight end. They invested quite a bit in free agency there as well. So it's really about Zach Wilson in year 2, but the defense was taken care of well for the Jets, and some good depth there at the end of the draft for them. So love what the Jets did. Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh, they're on their way to rebuilding this team in the right way. Matching the Ravens and the Jets up there on top, the Philadelphia Eagles. What a draft for them. They get a marquee wide receiver, A.J. Brown, blockbuster deal with the Titans. They put him with last year's first-round pick, Devonta Smith, and Jalen Hurts has got to be really happy about that. And the defense was well taken care of as well. They tapped into the Georgia Bulldogs not once, but twice. Traded up to get Jordan Davis. He was a defensive tackle they loved. Put next to Fletcher Cox. Take over that dominant inside presence on their defense. So looking forward to see what Jordan Davis can do in that scheme next to Cox. And then you go later this draft, Nakobe Dean was sliding, the teammate behind Jordan Davis. These guys were the 2 most impactful players on that Bulldogs national championship defense. Concerns about the injury there, but you put Nakobe Dean in the second level for the Eagles. Special player that can cover a lot of ground. They've been looking for that guy for quite a while. So those 2 players alone and A.J. Brown, I mean, you can look at the rest of the draft. They got some good offensive line, tight end depth, but just those 2 players and Brown, what a draft haul for the Eagles. Much improved team going into 2022. All right, so those were our 3 A+ teams, but there are a lot of other teams that did really well getting A's. One of those teams, the Kansas City Chiefs, and they did exactly what they needed to do. It was a rough offseason, losing Charvarius Ward, losing Tyrann Mathieu, and the big one, trading Tyreek Hill to the Dolphins. Well, they got those replacements pretty well in this draft. Trent McDuffie, first-round pick, love him out of Washington. He's going to start right away for them, have an impact in coverage. You have George Karlaftis, a freaky pass rusher out of Purdue. Needed some depth there to help Frank Clark and get after the quarterback. So love those 2 picks, but Sky Moore, he's the guy that we're excited about most because he's a Tyreek Hill clone, and he could replace Hill really well here for the Chiefs. So excited what he can do. And I also think Brian Cook, the safety they took out of Cincinnati, can start there and help them with Justin Reed, who they got from the Texans, and really improve safety all around for them. So love the picks. Leo Chenal, don't sleep on him either, the Wisconsin linebacker they got. I think he can start right away in the middle. So good recognition of needs by Brett Veach and Andy Reid, addressing them on offense and defense. That's why, again, they get an A. It's a familiar tune with Kansas City. Another team that lost a wide receiver but rebounded to pick one in this draft and also gets an A, the Green Bay Packers. You gotta like what they did after the first round pick. Quay Walker, a little bit of reach, but he filled an important need, and he's a very talented player at linebacker. Then you get Devonta Wyatt, so they tap into the Georgia defense twice, much like the Eagles. So you can't argue with that too much. They needed those pieces for the front seven, but the coup here was Christian Watson making a deal with the Vikings, a division rival, and they get a wide receiver they really like here. Great size and speed, can play on the outside. He looks like the part of a number one for Aaron Rodgers, so he has to be excited. There you also have Romeo Doubs, a wide receiver they really liked also later. So 2 replacements there. You lose Adams in that trade to the Raiders, and you also have Marcus Valdes-Scantling moving on to the Chiefs. So good pickups there, wide receiver. Rodgers has to be pleased. They also addressed the offensive line a couple times with Sean Ryan out of UCLA and Zach Tom, a guy that can possibly take over at center sometime soon. So love the Packers picks overall. Even got some pass rush depth later with Kingsley Enagbare from South Carolina. So good overall recognition of needs. Pretended they were like a contender the way the Chiefs did, and the Packers rebounded really well in the 2022 NFL Draft. Another team getting an A grade for their work in this draft, Jerry Jones and the Cowboys. And you look at their offseason, it was tough for their offensive line, losing Connor Williams and Lael Collins. Well, they addressed that immediately with a starter in Tyler Smith out of Tulsa. I really like his run blocking there. He's going to really help Ezekiel Elliott, which is important. Then Randy Gregory was another loss in free agency to the Broncos, so they get a pass rusher with a lot of moves there in Ole Miss's Sam Williams. And then we know they traded Amari Cooper, so they needed some wide receiver depth. I really like Jalen Tolbert there. I think he's going to be a good complement when they spread the field there with CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup. So good pickup. Got some other fine players as well. Tight end depth with Jake Ferguson out of Wisconsin. Really great third day coup, though, in Damon Clark, the linebacker at LSU. He probably should have been a second-round pick, but now they get him to play with Leighton Vander Esch and Micah Parsons. So good work on thinking about the offense and defense, and the Cowboys upgraded nicely as the NFC East champions in this draft. So we talked about the A-plus teams, we talked about the A teams. Now here are the A-minus teams, and these are teams that did really well, but a little bit of question mark from all their talent that they acquired. The Pittsburgh Steelers will be our first team up here. And you look at their drafting of Kenny Pickett. Now, number 20th overall, you look at needing that quarterback with Ben Roethlisberger retiring. Now, I like Pickett as a prospect, but I think Malik Willis would have been maybe a better fit, with higher upside there for the Steelers. But they went with the high floor, and that's kind of where I'm knocking them a little bit, because I do like Pickett, but I like Willis more. Now, what I do like, other than what they did at quarterback, is the fact that they helped that quarterback. They got George Pickens, a wide receiver who can stretch the field, good size for the outside, help Chase Claypool, help Deontay Johnson. And then they got an absolute speedster there, same position, Calvin Austin III out of Memphis, guy they can put in the slot. He's going to help them in the return game. So Steelers got tired of Ben Roethlisberger's fading arm there. They wanted some big plays out of their passing game, really complement what they want to do in the running game and defense. And I think they did that with their receiving haul here. And a nice story as well. They got Connor Hayward there, another brother pick that they've made over the years that we've seen. So he's going to be playing there with Cameron on the other side of the ball, playing fullback. And don't forget about DeMarvin Leal. I think he'll be a very effective player getting after quarterback in their 3-4. The Minnesota Vikings also earn A- for this draft. The minus comes from the fact that they made deals not with one division rival in the Packers, but also the Lions. They helped both of those teams. So interesting decision there by their new GM, Kwesi Adolpho-Mensah, working to help Kevin O'Connell, their new head coach. And really, they first focused on defense. I really like the first two players they got for their secondary. Lewis Seen, a safety out of Georgia. I think he's going to clean up nicely, learn well under Harrison Smith. You have Andrew Booth Jr. He's also going to be a good protege there of Patrick Peterson, who's back at the other corner. So two young players they can bring along well in this defense. I think Ed Ingram, the guard they got at LSU, he can start right away in the interior. They need a lot of help there to continue to bolster that for Kirk Cousins and Dalvin Cook. And then some other good depth players, Brian Asamoah, the linebacker out of Oklahoma, the cornerback Caleb Evans out of Missouri. So kind of replenishing some defensive depth there mostly. but also a little bit of offense. So really like the Vikings overall. The quality of players they got at 1-2 and Steen and Booth, you can't argue with that. The Seattle Seahawks also get an A-, and the minus comes from the fact that they weren't really interested in taking a quarterback and are going to continue on with Drew Lock as a starter, the quarterback they got in the Russell Wilson trade. So maybe they're tabling it for next year. They maybe didn't like the guys in this class, but still you thought they would address it at some point here, but Seahawks chose not to do that. Instead, they focused a lot on their power running game, and they got 2 bookend tackles I think are going to start for them very soon. Charles Cross for sure on the left side, replacing Dwayne Brown, but watch out for Abraham Lucas. They're pretty weak at right tackle as well. So the key for both these guys, big, strong bodies. Pete Carroll wants to have them run the ball well. So you got these 2 tackles to do that, but you also got Kenneth Walker III. I thought he was the best running back on the board. A little bit surprised that the Seahawks took him at first, but I think they must be concerned with Chris Carson, Rashad Penny. Both of these guys have a long injury history, so get a workhorse back, upgrade your offensive line to help those guys going. And then they did address their issues in pass defense pretty well here. Boye Mafe, high upside pass rusher out of Minnesota. Also later in the draft, I like Tyreek Smith out of the Big Ten as well, Ohio State product. Kobe Bryant at corner, Tariq Woolen, another secondary guy. So they did address their needs pretty well outside of quarterback. That's why they receive an A- in Seattle. The Titans also receive an A- for their draft, and their minus comes from the fact that they're banking on Treylon Burks to be just as good in the same type of body as A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, however, was already an established superstar, so that's a little bit of a risk, not paying that wide receiver and having the Eagles do that instead and upgrade with a number 1 receiver. So Burks, there are a lot of questions about the speed, quickness. Can he be at that same level? I think the body type is there with A.J. Brown. I think the need obviously came about when they made that trade, but just waiting to see if Burks pans out to really feel good about what the Titans did here. But overall, like the rest of their draft, Roger McCreary, the corner out of Auburn, was a really good value pick. They just took the best player available in a lot of situations. That included Nicholas Petit-Frere, the offensive tackle out of Ohio State. But the coup here was getting Malik Willis. They saw Ryan Tannehill struggle mightily in the playoff game against the Bengals. They need to line up a successor here. Gives Willis a year to kind of get groomed, and they can get out of Tannehill's contract pretty easily there in 2023. So Willis still needs some time to grow. Developmental project in a good system there. So love the pick of Willis there. And then Hassan Haskins, also pretty important for their offense. Needed somebody to relieve Derrick Henry a little bit. He got worn down, we know, last year and had to miss quite a bit of time with the foot injury. So thinking a little bit about the future in their offense there for Mike Vrabel and John Robinson. The Houston Texans had an interesting draft. They get an A- for maybe ignoring a few needs, including edge rusher with their haul for Lovie Smith taking over as head coach. But Nick Caserio did pretty well as GM to kind of restock the shelf here for a really talent-poor roster. Derek Stingley Jr., a little bit of controversy whether he should have been the first corner or Sauce Gardner. They go with Stingley, but does a lot of things well for their type of defense. Lovie Smith has kind of drifted away from his zone tendencies, but that only helps Stingley because he's a guy that can do things in single coverage and maybe shut down some guys. So you like Derek Stingley Jr., and then you look at Jalen Petre out of Baylor. I think he can play corner and safety for them, a bit of a hybrid player. They did lose Justin Reed to the Chiefs, so he could replace him somewhere in the secondary as a starter. So 2 secondary starters there for Lovie Smith. You also get some offensive help here. Kenyon Green, the guard out of Texas A&M, can really help their run blocking up front. And you really look at John Mechie. I really like his speed out of Alabama. They needed that type of receiver. We'll see if they keep Brandon Cooks at this point, but they have some depth there with Chris Conley, Nico Collins, and now Mechie, a big play target for Davis Mills, so they're sticking to the quarterback. And then the really good pick here, Christian Harris out of Alabama. I like this kid. He's going to clean up a lot. The Texans are really bad at inside linebackers, so Harris is going to be an immediate starter, and watch for him to rack up a lot of tackles, make a lot of plays as a rookie for Houston. Our last A- team is the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Chargers were very aware of what type of team they have. They made big deals in the earlier offseason for J.C. Jackson, getting him at corner. Also the big trade with the Bears for Khalil Mack. So they lost a little bit of draft capital there in the Mack deal, but they made the most of what they had. They needed an interior offensive lineman to start. They got him right off the top in Zion Johnson's Boston College talent to come in over to the NFL. So really like Johnson taking over at right guard. They had a great left tackle pick last year in Rashawn Slater. So Continuing that, they also got a potential starting right tackle later in the draft in Jimmery Salier from Georgia. So another Georgia talent on the offensive side that can be better in the NFL than he was in college. So excited about what the Chargers can do up front for Justin Herbert. They also got a running mate for Austin Eckler and Isaiah Spiller. He's a good power back complement there. Take pressure off Eckler running the ball. So Chargers realize they have something special with the rookie contractor Herbert. Did a lot of big splash moves for their defense, and here they took care of their offense to improve their fortunes here in year 3 with their franchise quarterback. Our first B-plus team is the Atlanta Falcons, and the reason they get a B-plus is I really thought they were going to go wide receiver in the first round. They did that, but it was curious that they took Drake London instead of Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson from Ohio State and Jameson Williams of Alabama were all on the board. They decided to jump on London first. I didn't like him as much as those guys, so a little bit curious to go in a different direction at a position of need when all the other guys were more on the radar for them earlier. So we'll see if London pans out. He's a bit boomer bust for me, but he does fill a need, as did Arnold Ebiketie, their edge rusher from Penn State. They got with their next pick. Troy Anderson, they need to replace Fosaid Oluokun at linebacker, and Anderson can do that, be pretty rangy, make a lot of tackles. So another need filled there. And Desmond Ridder, they caught the falling star at quarterback. He can learn and sit for a year behind Marcus Mariota. They're very similar prospects with their athleticism and makeup here. The key for Ridder is going to be showing that arm accuracy and consistency that Mariota didn't quite in Tennessee. That's the reason why he's now a Falcons bridge quarterback here in 2022. Now, you look at the rest of their draft, pretty good. I also like Tyler Allgeier from BYU. He's a good power back. They need to get more traditional in the running game. Mike Davis didn't pan out. They'd use Cordell Patterson in a bit of a hybrid role. So now they have that pounder, Allgeier, power backs. We know Arthur Smith comes from Tennessee and Derrick Henry. So getting that back late in the draft was also a good pick. And a pretty nice overall Falcons draft here in 2022. Our next team that gets a B+, the Indianapolis Colts. They didn't have a first-round pick, so that was already a limitation there for GM Chris Ballard as he tried to improve the offense for Frank Reich, but they did pretty well here, getting the wide receiver Alec Pierce. He can stretch the field on the outside, a very good complement with his size and speed to Michael Pittman Jr. So Matt Ryan needed some help. He's diminishing a bit with his arm strength, so you got to help him with the wide receivers, and you got to help him with an offensive tackle, and they did that. Losing Eric Fisher, they went back to Central Michigan. Bernard Rayman was the pick there. He's an Austrian guy with a lot of talent here, that's still developing, so he could be a special left tackle for them for many years to come. They also got some tight end depth with Jack Doyle retiring, Jelani Woods out of Virginia, so I like that pick. I also like Nick Cross, the safety they got there out of Maryland. I think he can start strong safety right away for them, really clean up against the run. So good picks overall, thinking about offense and defense with some limited draft capital for the Colts. As we get to the middle of the class in our draft grades, we have the Carolina Panthers. Some people have them a little bit higher. I have them at number 15, getting a B+ here. And you got to like the first pick, Ike Ekwonu, the offensive tackle there out of NC State, right down the street. That was the big need for the Panthers all offseason long. Now, the big question is, would they trade for Baker Mayfield? What were they going to do at quarterback? Well, they ended up with Matt Corral at Ole Miss, so not bad there. They needed someone to compete with Sam Darnold, push him a little bit. Maybe Corral pans out with his arm and athleticism and is the quarterback of the future. Maybe he doesn't, but they didn't invest a lot in trying to find that out. They can always look at quarterback in next year's class, which is going to be a lot stronger for that position. So the Panthers took care of business here with their first 2 picks in terms of what everyone expected them to do. Now, their other picks, they have some good upside. I like Brandon Smith, the linebacker out of Penn State. The guard also they got out of Tennessee, Cade Mays. 2 good players that could start down the line, but when you look at the Panthers overall, it was a solid draft, but not spectacular, and that's why you give them a B+ and put them here at number 15. Another team getting a B+ and comes in number 16, the Denver Broncos. And it was hard for the Broncos to draft really well because they gave up a lot of draft picks to get Russell Wilson. So that really was their draft. That was also their free agency as well, landing the former Seahawks quarterback to be their franchise passer. But they're still a distant third behind the Chargers and Chiefs in this division. They did pretty well with GM George Patton. Nick Bonito, the edge rusher they got out of Oklahoma, is a good compliment to Bradley Chubb. They got a replacement for Noah Fant, who was involved in the Wilson deal, and Greg Dulcich. He's a very athletic tight end, so gives Wilson another weapon with Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton. So good to have another target there for that offense with your new quarterback. Now, the rest of their picks really about depth for defense and offense, so not a lot of impact from this draft. But again, Broncos weren't expected to do a whole lot given that their draft really came when they made that deal with the Seahawks for Wilson. Right behind the Broncos is our final team from the AFC West, the Las Vegas Raiders, and their draft again was all about getting Davante Adams, giving up big picks to the Packers. So they started really late in this draft. They were the hometown team in the draft, so not a lot to cheer about until they got Dylan Parham, the guard out of Memphis. He's going to start right away, help their run blocking. And interesting, speaking of their running game, they didn't pick up the option on Josh Jacobs, didn't bring back Jalen Richard, so Josh McDaniels is trying to go in a completely different direction at running back, it looks like. And for that reason, they got Zamir White out of Georgia. So I think he's going to be their lead back here sooner rather than later. So pretty decent pick for your second pick in this draft with limited picks. Then good defensive line depth as well between Neil Farrell Jr. and Matthew Butler, the two defensive tackles they took. I also think they got a good value in Thayer Munford, the offensive tackle from Ohio State, on the very final the draft. So not bad for the Raiders, given a lot of their draft capital was gone for their new GM Dave Ziegler with that Davante Adams trade. Coming up next is a team from the NFC South, New Orleans Saints. They are our first B team, and why they got a B is they had some pretty good volume in this draft. They focused it on getting really good talent early, and it really shrunk here. They ended up with only 5 selections in this draft, but the first 2 were pretty good. Chris Olave, the wide receiver out of Ohio State, gives them a true number 1. They want to stretch the field better with Jameis Winston. Michael Thomas, more of an intermediate threat. So this is a true number 1 overall from the same program that gave them Michael Thomas. So they felt comfortable with that. So they make that deal with the Commanders, get Olave. So they want to really push it here with Jameis Winston, give it a shot with his big arm. To do that, they also needed better pass protection after losing Teron Armstead in free agency to the Dolphins. So they go Trevor Penning. They've been mocked this guy for a long time, so they made it a reality. Big, nasty blocker out of Northern Iowa. He should start right away opposite Ryan Ramczyk at left tackle. So offense was on the mind of the Saints. It just was a little bit surprising. They didn't focus a little bit more on defense with Dennis Allen taking over the team. And I think one void in their draft was not tapping into one of the better pass rushers in this draft. The next team that gets a B is the Buffalo Bills, and why they get a B is they did take Kaiir Elam, the cornerback out of Florida, but I really like Trent McDuffie or Andrew Booth Jr. They weren't able to get either of those guys in the first round, so I think both those corners would have been better fits for the defensive scheme, but Elam's not bad either. He's got nice size and coverage, and he did fill that need, as I mentioned. Now, James Cook is a very intriguing prospect here. He's the brother of Dalvin Cook, Vikings feature back. James Cook is a different type of receiver. He's a change of pace guy, speed, quickness, and the biggest thing that Devin Singletary and Zach Moss don't do is catch passes at a high level. So now you got a dynamic check down option there for Josh Allen as well. Now the rest of their draft was okay. I did like Khalil Shakir, the wide receiver they got for a little bit of extra depth behind Gabriel Davis and Stephon Diggs. And then Matt Araiza, the punter out of Arizona State, just a great athlete for that position. They needed to upgrade there. So the Bills don't figure to be punting much with their offense and how much they can score, but this guy can be a game changer in field position and maybe alter some playoff fortunes for them this year. So pretty good draft overall for the Bills. Doesn't pop as much as some other teams, but did what they could here given they didn't have a lot of desperate needs going in with GM Brandon Beane. Our next team getting a B grade is the Detroit Lions, and some people had them getting a higher grade here, but it was hard to mess up the draft when you go with number 2 and number 32 overall, and really, they didn't have to do much with their first pick. Aiden Hutchinson fell into their laps. The Jaguars passed on him. They get the local kid out of Detroit. They needed a pass rusher for their 4-3 scheme. He's an ideal fit, so the perfect player from the perfect place landed right to the Lions. Now, interesting that they decided to make a deal with the Vikings, move up from that 32nd pick, and take Jameson Williams, the wide receiver out of Alabama. Now, you can't fault them to say, look, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson were off the board. Let's go get this plus talent. But they seemed in pretty good shape last year. Got a steal in Amon-Ra St. Brown. So a little bit of a luxury pick for a rebuilding team. So that kind of knocks them a little bit. I do love Williams, the player. So Hutchinson and Williams, great players. I think they reached a little bit with the rest of their draft. So great start for the Lions, knocked it out of the park, but added some depth at other positions, but they could have fared a little bit better, and that they also shrunk their draft capital a bit with GM Brad Holmes. That's why they only finished at number 20 with a B. At number 21, the Cleveland Browns also get a B, and this is a team that made a blockbuster trade as well for Deshaun Watson. So much like we saw with the Raiders and Dolphins, didn't have a lot of draft capital here to start out with, but they did make the most of it. They got some players that really fit their scheme. I like Martin Emerson, the cornerback they started their draft with, can put him into their scheme, put them in sub packages, and really help that secondary overall. I also like David Bell, the wide receiver they got out of Purdue, is a nice size target there. They need a little bit of help for Deshaun Watson beyond Amari Cooper, and I think he's a good complementary receiver that he can put on the outside in time and start. So Emerson, a good sub-package player. Bell, a good starter. Perrion Winfrey, also a good upgrade there for their defensive line. Needed somebody inside to really play off Myles Garrett, disrupt the backfield. Perrion Winfrey of Oklahoma, good value pick for them. And don't forget about kicker. They went there with Cade York out of LSU. It was easy to go in that direction. Evan McPherson was mentored by the same person that gave Cade York a shot here at LSU to really develop into a top kicker. So copycat their team in the same state. The Bengals got their kicker. Good pick overall for the Browns. Just a little bit of more above average state for them without having a lot of picks here in the draft. Another team getting a B, the New York Giants. Much like the Detroit Lions, they started the draft really well here with 2 picks, but hard to mess up again when you have number 5 and number 7 overall, and they just let the draft come to them. Great talent was available early. They got Kayvon Thibodeau for their edge pass rush. They love having those type of players over the years. It doesn't matter. Same kind of philosophy here for the new GM, Joe Shane, and coming back with Evan Neal, their offensive tackle. So they did 2 things that were very expected. They could have maybe gone cornerback here early, but went with the players that fit needs on both sides of the ball. You can't question that. But then I thought Wan'Dale Robinson, a bit of a stretch there at wide receiver. A lot of similarities between him and Kadarius Toney and Sterling Shepard. They already have both of those players on their team. Then a lot of reaches overall. Interior offensive line, looking at corner, tight end, linebacker. I think the rest of their draft just a little bit questionable, took some players way earlier than they should have. So really this draft and their grade heavily weighed on the fact that Thibodeau and Neal were great picks, but the rest of this draft left a lot to be desired by the Giants. The first B- team we have, the Cincinnati Bengals, the AFC champions. Tough offseason in relation to what all the other teams did in the AFC North. The Ravens just knocked this draft out of the park. The Steelers got their new franchise quarterback. The Browns got Deshaun Watson. So it's tough for the Bengals to keep up this offseason. They did the best they could. They really addressed the offensive line well in free agency. This draft didn't give them a lot of impact players for now to kind of maintain that status. I like Daxton Hill, the safety out of Michigan they got first, but he looks like he's a replacement for Jesse Bates next season when it's pretty clear they won't be able to sign him to a long-term deal with the deals needed for Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase pretty much around the corner. So a little bit drafting ahead. It's the luxury that they have when they don't have too many weaknesses. Cam Taylor-Britt looks like he can be an upgrade from Eli Apple at that second corner spot, so something to watch for there. So Hill and Taylor-Britt, not bad picks. Zach Carter, the defensive tackle out of Florida, helps their depth a little bit. Just not the impact I was looking for in this class for the Bengals that was going to help them keep up with better teams, including getting a tight end to replace C.J. Uzomah that isn't Hayden Hurst. So Bengals did the best they could here with Duke Tobin, the Sporting News Executive of the Year, but again, limited draft picks and didn't need to address a lot here with free agency working out pretty well. Another team checking in with a B- for their work in the 2022 NFL Draft, the Chicago Bears. And this was a tough evaluation for sure because the Bears didn't have a first-round pick, but I like their first pick here in the second round. Kyler Gordon, the cornerback out of Washington. He's a good complement to Jalen Johnson. He's their only good corner, so getting a second corner was critical, so they started out at least recognizing that glaring need. Also get Jaquan Brisker here. They're not bad at safety, but Eddie Jackson fading a little bit, so Brisker could be a replacement for him in a year or two full-time. Braxton Jones is another player I really like, the offensive tackle out of Southern Utah State. The Bears needed to address the right side there and did it pretty well for Justin Fields, but unfortunately not a lot of other good stuff for Justin Fields here. I thought they needed to be more proactive about upgrading wide receiver beyond Darnell Mooney. They ended up with Velus Jones Jr. They kind of were enamored by the Tennessee prospect's speed. I think they whiffed on getting a different type of prospect for wide receiver that would have worked out a little bit better. Dominique Robinson, interesting edge rusher, but no one near that can really replace Khalil Mack here after they traded him. So Bears still are pretty talent thin here for Justin Fields. I'm worried about him in the new situation, new offense, and with new coach Matt Eberflus. So Ryan Poles, their new GM, not bad start. It was really questionable here beyond getting Gordon and Brisker with those first 2 picks. Our last B- team, and they ranked 25th in relation to the other teams with how they fared in this draft, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, not a bad first pick there, getting Logan Hall as a versatile defensive lineman out of Houston, so they can put him in the Ndamukong Suh spot, help them stop the run a little bit, and also get after the quarterback inside. So I like that pick. They reached a little bit for Luke Gedeke there. They did take some hits in the interior offensive line. Ali Marpet retired. Alex Kappa signed with the Bengals, so they had to address that position a little bit, but Gedeke was a little bit of a stretch here. I'm not sure why they got Rachaad White, the running back from Arizona State, when you have Leonard Fournette and Giovanni Bernard, and also Keyshawn Vaughn still in the mix in this backfield. So a little bit of a weird extra pick the Buccaneers made at that position. I don't know if they needed a punter so badly to draft one here, but they did in Jake Camarda. Their best pick really overall might be Cade Otton, especially if Rob Gronkowski retires at tight end. I think here's a player that has good all-around tendencies, can really stretch the field. If he can grow into a blocker, he's going to be a very good replacement for Rob Gronkowski beyond the Tom Brady era in Tampa. Our first C team, unfortunately, is the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, they started with the first overall pick. They had a high volume of picks. Somehow that shrunk very quickly in this draft to half that. So 6 picks they made here. Looking at the start with Trayvon Walker, I thought he was not the best player on the board. They should have probably gone Aiden Hutchinson there out of Michigan. So Trayvon Walker, we'll see. He's got some upside here because he can stop the run, and he's a very explosive player if needed in the pass rush, but still a little bit boomer bust feeling with Trayvon Walker. So went for the high upside. We'll see if it works out for them. But a little bit questionable here for Trent Baalke and Doug Peterson in the first draft, trying to clean up things from the Urban Meyer mess from last year. I do like Devin Lloyd, the pick they got from Utah. They needed linebacker help to help Fosaid Oluokun there to clean up the second level. But then they went back to that position again with Chad Muma. I don't think they needed both of these players. So Chad Muma out of Wyoming at linebacker, 2 good cover guys, can do everything. Really questionable to add a third linebacker in that situation. Luke Fortner, a little bit of reach, but they were desperate to replace Brandon Linder at center. So very interesting. The Jaguars turned some quantity into limited quality, and that's why they get a C in this draft. Another C team in this draft, and they've had some good drafts in the past with GM Steve Keim. This was not one of them here for the Arizona Cardinals, and I think they let GM Kyler Murray make a lot of these moves here, including the trade for Marquise Brown, which was very questionable. They gave up a first rounder and other draft capital for him, so really weird deal that went down. It kind of was there just to make Kyler Murray happy. We know he's not been all that happy this offseason as he waits for a contract extension, and I'm not sure he's going to be thrilled about their moves either to help him in this draft. Trey McBride, they liked the tight end of Colorado State. I liked him. He was the best guy on the board. But they also brought back Zach Ertz and Max Williams. So I'm not sure what you're doing with McBride, looking for 2023, I guess, but still a very questionable starting pick. I do like that they addressed their front 7 twice with 2 guys who can get after the quarterback in Cameron Thomas and Myjai Sanders, but they did lose Chandler Jones, so it's hard to make up for that type of player. I didn't really like the rest of the draft. Keontae Ingram, a little bit of a reach at running back as well after losing Chase Edmonds. So Cardinals, just a lot of questionable moves. I think they could have tapped into cornerback in this draft a little bit earlier, as well as edge rusher. Just taking a lot of chances on guys that are boomer bust or didn't exactly fit their immediate needs. Our last C grade goes to the Miami Dolphins, and they didn't have a lot of draft capital here. They gave up a lot to get Tyreek Hill, and it's Tyreek Hill's team now, and they didn't have a lot of picks to work with, so only 4 picks Channing Tindall was a good need filler there, the linebacker of Georgia. Again, if you took a Georgia defensive player, offensive player, doesn't matter. You probably made a good pick in this draft. So not a bad first pick, and really the only significant impact here all the way through their last pick, Skylar Thompson, taking kind of a flyer, a developmental quarterback out of Kansas State. So, it's meh. But the Dolphins, again, did plenty of the offseason before with their moves in free agency, picking up Hill, picking up Taron Armstead and Connor Williams. So a lot of moves there in free agency. They were aggressive there. Chose not to do too much in this draft by giving up a lot of their picks. Okay, we're almost near the bottom of the class here, and our first C- team, I hate to say it, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch usually have better drafts, but it's the San Francisco 49ers. Just not a very good draft overall for the 49ers. Again, not working with a first-round pick. I did think they were off to a great start with Drake Jackson, the edge rusher out of USC, can complement what Nick Bosa does pretty well, but then it went downhill in a hurry. And I think the biggest problem here, they got too cute with their offensive picks here. Started with Ty Davis-Price, the running back at LSU. I think they could have got him on the last day or as an undrafted free agent. Look at Danny Gray, a project wide receiver out of SMU. They didn't trade Deebo Samuel, so I don't know why they needed to add another wide receiver here with the depth they have with Samuel and Brandon Ayuk and Juwan Jennings. A little bit of an extra kind of cute project pick here for Kyle Shanahan at that position for a run-heavy team. So questionable picks there, Davis-Price and Gray back-to-back. Then later, they use a pick on Brock Purdy as Mr. Irrelevant. I'm not sure why they need another quarterback in this mix if they're not sure what they're doing with Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance in that situation. Then just a lot of reaches overall. Their two best picks really were Spencer Burford, a guard that they got, and also Tariq Castro-Fields. I think he can be a pretty good corner for them, but still, it's a lot of ifs and buts and hoping for all these players to pan out. I just think going too offensive, skill-minded here really made the 49ers draft stick out as one of the worst ones this offseason. Staying in the NFC West, we got to go with that other team that played the 49ers in the NFC Championship game, and they won the Super Bowl. They're the Los Angeles Rams. They didn't pick here until after the top 100 picks, so there wasn't a lot of room to improve their team, but the Rams, do they really need the draft to improve? They just kind of trade first and second round draft picks like nothing to get the players they want, load up their roster. So Sean McVay and Les Snead took it casual again. And I think their biggest moment here was kind of mocking the Patriots for taking Cole Strange there in the first round, because that was the player they were going to take there. In the third round, they still addressed that same position pretty well. Guard was a need, really the only glaring need here for the Rams to get Logan Bruss. They did get some good cornerback depth here that they needed for Jalen Ramsey, but they also made a deal for Troy Hill, so brought back their former number 2 corner in a trade with the Browns, so that helped. Kyron Williams, interesting pick that they took the Notre Dame running back when they're sorting out their own running back issues between Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson, so not a lot to see here, but you look at Logan Bruss, fills a need, pretty good first pick, but the rest of it just uninspiring here with limited capital for the Rams. All right, we're almost near the end of the bottom of the class here with our draft grades for 2022. Unfortunately, the Washington Commanders are right near the bottom at number 31. They also get a C- for their class, and here's why. A little bit curious that they went for Jahan Dotson, stuck to their guns, and took a wide receiver anyway, despite trading out of the spot where Chris Olave was taken by the Saints. And then you consider Drake London going pretty early, and then you had Jameson Williams and Garrett Wilson. I think they forced a pick on Jahan Dotson. Now, I like Dotson, the player. I think he would have been better off on another team as that number 2 deep threat. I think for me, the Commanders needed a true number 1, move Terry McLaurin into a more complimentary role. Instead, they got a guy who can complement McLaurin a little bit, but I don't trust Dotson as an all-around receiver. This might remind some Commanders fans of Josh Doxson. Very similar name, but also could have the same bust material here for the Commanders with their new name. Now, Phidarian Mathis, they love Alabama defensive linemen. They have Jonathan Allen. They got Daron Payne, but do they need Phidarian Mathis? I don't think so, not for the front. I think he also fits better for 3-4. And then Brian Robinson, what are they doing at running back? They have Antonio Gibson. They have J.D. McKissick. I like Jarrett Patterson there, their number 3 running back. They don't need Brian Robinson either. So Robinson, Dotson, these are 2 fine offensive players, but wrong fit. Didn't make sense for the Commanders at all this draft. And then Sam Howell, Again, don't force quarterback if it's not there. Sam Howell's stock was clearly dropping in this class. Maybe they could have done what the Eagles did, take a chance on Carson Strong as an undrafted free agent, but why force a pick on Sam Howell late? In some circles, he's also known as another Taylor Heineke. So why do you need Sam Howell? You made the upgrade for Carson Wentz here. Just go with that. I don't understand what the Commanders are doing in relation to the rest of their division. That's why they get a C- for Ron Rivera and Martin Mayhew. The team at the bottom of the class, yes, it is Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots. They also get a C-, but clearly the worst draft of any team of the league. The Patriots are not used to being at the bottom with Belichick, but they deserve this grade wholeheartedly here. And it was very bizarre to take Cole Strange early in the first round. He's a guy that the Rams were thinking was going to be available in the third round. I know they had a needed guard, but to go to Cole Strange right away out of Chattanooga, get cute to make a small school pick, a little bit of trendy for Bill Belichick, but also not effective. Then they went after a wide receiver. I like him. I like his speed. He was the fastest guy at the combine, Tyquan Thornton, but I thought there were a lot of better wide receivers out there that they could have targeted here in this draft. Really, up to 10 guys, I think, were better than Thornton at the time that they took him. Marcus Jones was a pretty good pick. They did lose J.C. Jackson in free agency. Last year they had to trade Stephon Gilmore, but Marcus Jones to me is more of a hybrid player, plays in nickel packages, could take over at safety, but he's not the outside corner. I don't think Jack Jones is their next pick after Marcus Jones. And then what were they doing with two running backs? They already have Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson. They take Pierre Strong. They take Kevin Harris. Another Harris that you have to keep track of on this team. What are they doing? I don't get it. They lose Josh McDaniels, and they go a little nuts here, getting depth at position they didn't need. Bailey Zappi, the quarterback they got, is a nice player, but he's going to be a backup only. We know with Mac Jones there, so he's probably their next Brian Hoyer, but did you need to address that position so badly in the draft at the expense of not taking a cornerback earlier to help replace J.C. Jackson? They needed better pass rush help. They didn't really go after that position, even though it was loaded in this draft. And they didn't go for any linebacker help whatsoever. Remember when they were mocked Devin Lloyd of Utah and Nakobe Dean of Georgia? I don't remember anymore because they didn't go after linebacker once in this draft, being a glaring need, not only for losing Dante Hightower, not re-signing him, but also moving on from Kyle Van Noy. So I'm not sure what the Patriots were doing. I think sometimes they try to be the smartest person in the room, but really the last two drafts without Tom Brady, really if you go back, Tom Brady's masked a lot of draft deficiencies over the years for Bill Belichick. So this was the absolute pits. They deserve their grade completely. 32nd and last. The Patriots not used to being there. C-, worst team in the 2022 NFL Draft. Hope you enjoyed our look at the draft grades for all 32 teams, for the teams that did well and the teams that did poorly. Thanks a lot, and check out more on the NFL Draft and the analysis there from 2022 at sportingnews.com.